Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. And today we are joined by Bruce Otte, the CIO of JERA America. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be here, and thanks for reaching out.
A pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlynx.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass security, so companies need a way of knowing when they've gotten past your security. That's where CyberLynx intrusion detection comes in. With our 24/7 security operations center, we use a combination of AI and cybersecurity technicians to see when a hacker has successfully bypassed your security. So if a bad guy gets past your security, we'll find out right away and be able to kick them out. Find out more at cyberlynx.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Bruce, again, thanks for coming on. And for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about JERA and your role there as CIO?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you a little bit about JERA and also myself. Myself as CIO here at JERA Americas, I actually spent almost 18 years working for IBM. While I was with IBM, I worked in data center services. I worked in application services. I was the director of enterprise, so SAP, Oracle, Microsoft applications running on the cloud before they even started doing their cloud delivery of them. And so, I've had a lot of experience across the full area of a company. And so JERA itself is basically a $60 billion startup. And what I mean by that is that JERA was created post-Fukushima. The tsunami that took out the nuclear power plant, caused all the power disruptions, et cetera. The Japanese government said we got to do something very different from that standpoint. And so JERA was created then from a joint venture between Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, and Chubu Electric. And they were kind of the east side and west side of the main island, if you will, from a domination perspective. And so they took all of their thermal assets, thermal power generation assets, and put it into that company and structured that company to be the power generation supplier. And then they took all of their investments they had around the world outside in fuel acquisition, so natural gas acquisition, natural gas processes. So TEPCO and Chubu both had outside Japan investments. They put those into the company as well. And so, boom, 9 years ago, they created this brand new company that suddenly was responsible for generating all the power for Japan, but also had these responsibilities around the world. JERA Americas then was the merger of the investment assets in the U.S. that TEPCO and Chubu had made. That included the Freeport natural gas liquefaction facility down in Freeport, Texas, just south of Houston, where JERA Americas is based, as well as investments in 12 power plants around the U.S., 11 of those thermal, and then one of those being a wind project, as well as investments in other wind projects that we have. And so JERA Americas started out just as an enterprise asset company, right? And then they decided they wanted to also get into power management, get into the energy power trading, both for managing the natural gas trading as well as the power trading for the power plants, and developing strong relationships then with each of the independent systems operators, the ISOs, your ERCOT or your New York, New Jersey Electric, or the New England Electric, right? Basically your ISOs that are responsible for the power distribution to the retailers, right? And as consumers, we deal with the retailers. All of this is going on behind the scenes to get those electrons to your house or to your business so you can actually use them. So that's who JERA is.
I mean, I think that's fascinating. For most people, you don't really get an insight into what makes the lights go on. I mean, we get the idea
That's
of
right.
you
Yep.
know, a power plant, and the lines
Exactly.
go from the power plant to the you know, to your house, and voila,
Exactly.
you've got
Yep.
lights. Really cool. But there's this whole fascinating world that's going on there that I think most people are just completely oblivious to. And I think it's really, really interesting. There's a lot of cool stuff going on there. And I think the concepts are so foreign to most people. So if you don't mind, I'd love to just kind of dive in a little bit because I think it'd be fascinating for
Oh,
people to kind of
absolutely.
understand a little bit more because I
Yep.
think I think most people are starting at zero understanding of it, and I
Yep.
think it's a really you know, kind of fascinating you know, kind of topic, and you kind
Yeah.
of hit on it a little bit with what JERA is doing there, but
Exactly.
could you can you kind of walk people through the what, you know, how that all works because it's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Well, what's so fascinating about it is that I think we are into what everybody's familiar with, quote, the energy industry, right? But the energy industry is more than what it used to be. The energy industry used to be, oh, oil and gas, right? Or utilities. And they had these separations between them. That doesn't exist anymore, right? JERA, it derives as much or more money from natural gas as it does from generating the electrons that are then going into the market to be sold. You see BP and Shell um, making investments in the power generation side. Interestingly enough, particularly here in Texas, right, they've got a lot of oil pipelines. Well, there's no electric company that's going to be running the electricity out to all of those different pumps and pipelines to keep things going. So the oil companies built their own. So they have their own internal power generation for
Mm.
providing what they need and how they need to do it. Well, they looked at that and said, well, we're already doing it for ourselves. Can we get into the energy market? So you have this real blurring now occurring between those two. And how this actually works is that to generate electricity, you have to have some type of fuel source. And right now, today, the economy is dominated by the following fuel sources: nuclear, which has a lot of restrictions around it, but it's still very efficient, very clean, right? Hydro, which is very efficient, very clean, but has environmental impacts.
Right.
So a lot of your hydros have been really changed and adapted, and we're just not seeing the hydros being built like they once were because of the environmental impacts that are taking place. Then you have what we call thermal, right, which is basically using a motorized engine of some type, right, to generate power. And the way you power that motor is directly with fuel. So it could be fuel oil, or it could be natural gas is a common fuel. The newer fuels coming up are hydrogen and ammonia. So you see a lot in the markets about, can we do hydrogen? Can we do ammonia to have a cleaner fuel for burning? As well as then you also power those turbines, right? Because you're just basically spinning copper on copper to create the electric charge that you're driving. Can we power those turbines with steam? Well, with steam, you've got to heat up the steam, right? So the original way we did the power plants was coal. And everybody goes, oh, coal, coal, bad, bad, bad. So, we've got to get away from coal for powering. So that moved then for some of the boiler systems to be using natural gas, just like furnaces do at home, or using fuel oil, like furnaces do at home in the Northeast, right? But still carbon-based products that are driving that and working with that to create that steam that's powering that. So that's your thermal power. Then we move into the newer age of what we call renewables power. And what we mean by renewables is it's nature created. So it's not something that's man created. So you have wind right now is a very dominant power force that exists in our world that we're saying, can we harness that to create electricity, spinning the copper on copper? Or can we use solar, right? And using solar voltaic cells, if you will, to convert light into electricity, which, by the way, is the same thing your eye does, right? So at the back of your eye, you've got receptors that are basically converting the light you're seeing into electric charges that go to the brain so it interprets what you are. So We didn't make that up. We didn't create it. It was part of the human body or part of the body that we then mimic that with our solar cells and what's out there. So you have to have power to create the electricity, right? Once you've created the electricity, then you've got to store it or distribute it, right? And you can only store so much before you have to distribute it. So we have the distribution networks for moving that power to the places where it needs to be. And this is what we call in the US the independent systems operators, the ISOs. Now, from this standpoint, those power generating guys sell their electricity to the ISOs. The ISOs sell their electricity to the retailer. So your Xcel Energy or your local company electric bill that you're signing off, they're the retailer, right? So they're charged with dealing with you. And how do we do this? If we had all the power we ever needed, not a lot of challenges or not a lot of issues in managing that distribution, managing that power generation, what we where we are, etc. But we don't, right? We've seen all the time written over and over again that there's power shortages. We've got the advent of AI and AI data centers coming up. We still have the Bitcoin mining, right? The crypto mining occurring that's driving usages. We still have continued home growth, right? We're always measuring how many homes are we growing? How's the population growing? Well, how are we growing the electricity to support all of that?
Right.
And this has led to a lot of looking at how are we monitoring our power distribution to make sure that we have the right power in the right place at the right time. This has led to a lot of analytics being put around this power generation to say, oh, if we look at a historical past, how can we adjust that or adapt that for the future? Sometimes they're good at it, sometimes not so good. If you recall, a couple of years ago, there was a major freeze in Texas and, a lot of issues with ERCOT and what they had and power outages and what took place. And that actually followed on the heels then by a bunch of brownouts during the summertime because it got super hot and there was more power demand than they could meet with the power supply. So what did ERCOT do to try and fix that? Batteries, right? So they set up batteries all around. Why? Well, batteries hold the energy, right? So you want to hold that energy for times when you believe there's going to be a potential high demand coming, so that you're not having to pay a higher price in the market to fire up these thermal power plants that may cost you more than your renewables, or oil costs more than natural gas, which costs more than a nuclear power generated, which costs more than a hydropower generated, right? So they're always trying to force to the lowest cost of power generation, so that you, the consumers, aren't having to pay such a high price in what's taking place. Now, as we look at this, Matt, for you, the key on this is what happens if a cybersecurity attack occurs, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I'm always looking at and always researching and checking, because across the entire value chain, from the time the natural gas is coming out of the ground or the fuel oil is coming on the ground, from the time it's liquefied and put on a ship, from the time it's sitting in a tank waiting to be used at those power plants, from the power standpoint, when it's distributed out there, when we talk about the renewable sources, if you take, in one case, 120 acres of land and you stick wind towers on it, and these wind towers are a quarter of a mile apart from each other, there's a lot of space out there. And there's a lot of critical data coming from there. And if any one of those start to experience a problem or do something to cause a problem to the grid, you could cause a rollout blackout as it rolls across, right?
Yeah.
So you have to pay attention to your security all the way across that particular area. And that's one of the big concerns that exists today in the energy space is security, because we've seen so much growing up so rapidly. How are we now going back to make sure that those are actually secure? Because anytime as we get more linkages of our data across our supplier systems, anytime false data gets fed into that, it could create catastrophic effects.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, and we've seen in when it comes to infrastructure, I think the energy sector is acutely aware and almost hypersensitive to the and rightfully so to the security risk inherent in this. I mean, they're just every day, all the time, in tune with that, and I think that's fantastic, and also I think the fact that the energy sector has done such a good job preventing massive brownouts all the time. I mean, it's actually spectacular when you think about it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
The all of the changes, the growth, it's impressive that we don't live in what you would, in like a third world country type environment where you have power,
Mhm.
well, we're not having power for 6 hours, and it's totally normal.
Exactly.
In so many countries, it's
Exactly.
totally normal.
Exactly. So many countries, it's very normal that for 6 hours to 8 hours a day. I mean, I was just listening to a BBC broadcast that talked about one of the countries in Africa that they get power for 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
So they do everything in those 4 hours, and then after that, it's gone.
Gone. Yeah, wild. And yet we lose our minds if the power flickers or it goes out for 2 minutes. We're like, oh, it's the end of the world. I
That's
mean,
right.
okay.
Exactly.
But
Yep.
that's a testament to what an incredible job as an industry, the has been, that's just an incredible job. It's spectacular. And I get that there's some regulation, but I think it's mostly self-regulating to keep up with that and provide excellent service. And that just when you think about, as you explained, all of the different pieces that go into that, all of the pieces that go into that to make
Mhm.
sure that your power stays on. So when we have, oh, there was a minor hiccup in Florida, minor, it was there was an issue in Texas, and there were brownouts, and it caused
Mhm.
a learning experience for sure. But
Exactly.
what industry, what company hasn't had issues where they're like, oh, they learn, but now it's front page news, and it's all over the place if the
Yeah.
energy, if an energy company screws up or has a learning
Yeah.
experience, the whole world knows about it. At least the whole country does, right?
Well, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Not only the whole country, but you have a governor threatening to find them and everything else, and yet there's so many different parts, right, of that flow and what works and what doesn't work, type of thing.
Yeah, and I get it. It's critical infrastructure, and it's really fascinating to me. I think the balance between the regulators and the free market here, and how
Mhm.
well that seems to work. Um,
It does. It has its challenges for sure, but it does. I mean, the overall energy market itself is controlled by the ISOs, right, which are a government body, right, that controls the distribution network, and then it's fed by the independent power companies to feed them. But those independent power companies are then controlled by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, right? And there's some very specific rules that we have to follow with FERC within processes at that power plant level, including a whole package around cybersecurity.
yeah,
And I think that's the biggest thing is that people aren't aware of the fact that the energy industry has been looking at this, and many of those rules that you see on the cybersecurity is now extending also to critical infrastructure, like our Freeport gas liquefaction facility. It's deemed one of the critical infrastructure components for the U.S., and so it comes under that FERC NERC SIP regulations as well.
yeah, which I think is great, and you don't see it so much in places like the water utilities, right? These
Right.
which I think is mind-boggling to me that people are ingesting this, and there's no real, I don't want to say there's no real regulation, but I know for firsthand experience,
Yes.
their level of concern with cybersecurity versus the energy sector, it's night and day. And I'm not
Absolutely.
throwing the whole water industry under the bus here, and I'm not
No,
saying
no,
that they
no.
don't care at all. But in contrast, it is stark the difference between the concern and the priority that is placed on cybersecurity in one industry, one critical infrastructure versus the other, which I think
Mhm.
is fascinating and also alarming, because I think it is only a matter of time because before there's a horrible water event, and then it's like, oh, how did you miss it? For decades you didn't
Well,
care.
so you know, we've already had horrible water events. Now they're not they're not what I say nationwide or anything like that, but we have seen horrible water events. I mean, we've had events in Colorado where people turn on their faucet and hold a lighter by the faucet and it starts flaming,
Yep.
right? Because a contaminant got in there that is flammable, and it wasn't caught by the water company as they were going through it. We've seen it where bacteria has gotten into a water supply, and somebody reports I got sick from drinking their water. They do a testing and say, "Oh, there's a bacteria. Okay, we got to shut down. You got to do this." So we've seen little exposures
Yep.
of this already.
That's true. And they don't, the fact that those happen in that way versus with electric, it's so, I mean, you guys are just so on top of it, right? And
Yeah.
I think because it is so fast, it's electric. I get it.
Mhm.
But I think that has caused the industry to be kind of amped up, if you will,
Mhm.
in their level of alertness and care versus
Yes.
water, which is not as it's not as rapid, right? It is not as
It's not as
instantaneous.
rapid.
You know,
But
it's
you know
something you
what's
can,
so funny about that, Matt, is we can always live without electricity.
yeah,
We
it's
can't live without water.
sure can't. Nope, it really can't. No, 100%. He says as he takes a drink of water.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I mean, I don't go more than 5 minutes without sipping water. It's
There you
ridiculous.
go.
I think I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
die if I went a whole day.
and you'll never have your coffee without the water.
That's exactly right. That's awesome. So you actually called Jira a what would you say, a 60 or a $90 billion
A
startup?
$60 billion startup. And I
So
say that, as a startup because they were thrown in with all these assets. They were thrown in with 5,000 employees to start with and said, okay, now go organize yourself and figure out what you want to do. So they've been working the last 9 years to try and get that organized.
so walk us through that. How does that happen? Because I think a lot of our listeners and viewers are the kind of entrepreneurs who've started their own business, and the thought of starting something like Jira, it's like, you kidding me? I mean, it's like
Yep.
I think it would be just as hard, if not harder, than starting a rocket company, right? I mean, it's like what?
Well,
There's a lot.
I think it's harder to be
Yeah.
honest because you are suddenly taking over operations of existing businesses, right? And told to now you've got to combine these into one organization. And in some cases, it's multiple different companies, right? That you got to try and combine up into one organization. You've got to try and unite them as one organization. And you start as simply as, okay, we've got to communicate with each other. So what platform do we use? The vast majority of the world chooses Microsoft 365 platform. And if you're in Japan, definitely Microsoft 365. To some in Japan, Google is hands off like this.
Hmm.
To others, not so much. For me, I don't have, but you choose one of your platforms, right? But it's going to become your company platform across the entire company. Well, when you start to configure that, you've got to be able to account for the fact that I'm not configuring it just for this company in Japan, in local language, local laws. Oh, I've got to configure this for 15 countries that we're operating in their laws and theirs. So it becomes very challenging from that standpoint. And so the first 5 years from the IT side and from the security side were just let's get the network in place, let's get network monitoring and security in place. Let's start to implement some security tools. They've been through 3 security tools changes just in the time I've been here and trying to find the one that's the best fit for what they're doing and how they're doing it. We're in the process over the next year now of taking that Microsoft environment that they had built and completely rebuilding that and restructuring that to support a very rapidly growing international business. I mean, when they first started JERA outside of Japan, they had, I'm not counting a joint venture that they had with EDF. Outside of Japan, they probably had 200 employees max. Today, inside Japan, they've got around 3,800, and outside of Japan, they're sitting at somewhere around 1,200 to 1,500. And the external outside Japan market is growing much faster. Well, as you can imagine, what you build to accommodate this very big little here that's now all of a sudden starting to be fit. You've got to rebuild that, right, to
Yeah.
accommodate both of them. We're in the process of completely redoing our ERP accounting system to accommodate that type of structure. So, you have all of those things going through. And then for JERA Americas, because we're kind of the flagship outside of Japan company that was out there, when I joined the company, there were 63 employees. By the end of that year, 2021, there was a little over 85 employees. Today, we're at 235. We'll be at 250 by the end of the year. So very rapid growth. And we had to go through and build everything from the ground up for them and what they were doing. And so I'm really proud of what we've accomplished in the 3 years. We've implemented the SAP ERP platform for all of their accounting. We've implemented the Success Factors HRIS system for all of the human resources management. We're finishing up the implementation of Ariba for our purchasing and supply chain team. Within the plants themselves, we've got Maximo set up now for all of the plants and what they're doing at their operations level. And the list goes on and on. We've implemented our own security protocols, our own security systems. So it extends quite a bit. And there's a lot to think about from an IT standpoint, because when you come in, you just get in your desktop. You don't think about how's that application I'm logging to running in the background and making sure it's running smoothly. How did I come and badge into the building this morning? Well, IT has to handle that security piece to that, right? I mean, there's just all these little pieces that involve technology in some way.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's one of the big challenges, for IT, is keeping up with that. And as an organization grows and changes, and that's massive. Most people don't end up experiencing that, the sort of growth on that level, and where it's multiple countries, and now you've got regulatory issues. You've got it's one thing when you're growing within one country. So that's very challenging. So that in and of itself is an IT, I don't want to say nightmare, but it is the challenge that everybody, keeping up with the technology, keeping up with the growth of the company, keeping everything running smoothly. Okay, great. We all get it. But then you tack on top of that, now you've got multiple countries, you've got multiple different kinds of regulatory bodies, you've got all kinds of that is that's a lot.
And then think about as a startup, what is the business you're in? Well, one of your businesses is operating power plants. So that's power generation. But then you have another business that's in the natural gas, right? So that's an oil and field natural gas. Most of those are a minority interest. So you're an asset manager and you just participate and you try and make sure that everything's running smoothly from that standpoint. But what does that mean on your side? Oh, that means I also need to be able to, if I want to make money, right, and protect my investment, I've got to get into the commodity trading side, right? So I can protect my investment on that. Now, in the case of JERA, right, where JERA is actually moving to become the energy trader for electrons for the power plants that we own and control for the daily trading, you've got to have active daily trading. So now you're in a fintech business, right? So under this one roof of JERA Americas, we've got an operations business, we've got an enterprise asset management business, and we've got a fintech trading business, all sitting under one roof. And you've got one IT that's trying to support all three of those business areas. So it's very challenging, even in one country, when you're in all those different business areas.
Yeah, that's got to be a lot of fun for you. That's
it has been a lot of fun. Absolutely.
That's great. I mean, that's a lot to I mean, just conceptualizing it all and all the different parts and how it goes, and then keeping up with everything. I mean, I think we can all appreciate how rapidly technology changes when we see things like AI. And I think for the average person, they're like, wow, we can all look back if we're adults and be like, holy crap, we've come a long way in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And it's impressive. And the growth and the rapid change has been it just mind blowing, really. And it just keeps picking up. And then you now shift perspective to the IT and cybersecurity side, and it's insane. Now all of the threats have been advanced by AI, and they're doing more faster and better. And now you've got to do the same on your end. And so now not only are you handling all of these different companies within your company, all the
Mhm.
different software, all the different people, that you're also now dealing with how do we keep up with the advances in technology, the advances in threats, the advances in cybersecurity. That is a lot. I mean, it's
Well, and from a security standpoint, as you said, what is your footprint, right? What is your attack footprint? What's the attack landscape look like? And the more businesses you get in, right, and you have to look at that both geographically as well um, uh, as technologically, right? The network side, right? And as that footprint continues to grow, you've got to figure out, okay, how do I keep my eyes on the entire footprint and what's taking place? And that is really what presents a lot of the challenges. I think that in our industry has what has led to the role of the chief information security officer, simply because there is so much there that having it sit under one organization, you know what, we got to have somebody just responsible for that so that this one can continue to make sure that our computers work, that our applications work, that our network is up and running,
that's right.
right? And I think that's what you're going to continue to see is transformations in roles and organizations that are trying to provide all this support.
I think
And
you're
then as the CEO of the company, right, the biggest challenge the CEO of the companies are facing is how do I handle and manage the costs, right? Because all I look at is my gosh, if I keep adding this, is that more cost? Where's the revenue coming in to do that? And really at the end of the day, IT is not a profit center, right? It
right.
is a cost center only. And paying cybersecurity, that's a risk mitigation. Is like paying insurance, right?
Yep.
And it's not how much is it going to cost if I do it? It's how much is it going to cost if you don't and something happens. And
Yeah.
that's a hard thing to wrap your head around when you're getting beat up by your board of directors on why is your profit margin slipping.
Yeah. No, it really is. And we've had it's funny, we've had some guests on who that, as CIO, they struggled with this, and then they talk about how getting there. And I think obviously a smaller organization, less regulated than yours. And for some businesses, it's a real challenge to get, I mean, the owners, especially if it's like a family owned business where the money kind of goes into the family coffers versus
Mhm.
shareholders where you've got to justify the profit margins and all the dollars there. But regardless, you get that pressure and trying to justify the even the cybersecurity side as always was really challenging until they did it, throw in a quick little tabletop exercise where hey, look, they spend an hour and they talk about here's what happened. We came in today and everything's, all the computers are locked up with ransomware. And they're like, the light bulb goes on for management when they're like, okay, as a
Mhm.
team, what do we do now? What does
Mhm.
this mean? You talk to legal, what are the ramifications? Now they actually take the time to think about it versus everybody's busy. Everybody's got their day to day. And most of the
Exactly.
pressures of, hey, look,
Exactly.
we got to keep the
Yep.
machine running. We got to generate revenue. We got to keep everybody employed and do a great job. Great. That keeps everybody busy in their field. The challenge becomes getting the leadership to understand that part of that is that security side. And so it's fun to hear those stories about how that first tabletop exercise changed everybody's perspective on, oh crap, it's not just, it is risk mitigation. But I think that I'm not sure that really hits home for people as much as you say it's like insurance, and
Mhm.
people like, yeah. And insurance we never use. And okay, but yeah, we have to
Yep.
have it. It's a whole lot different when you take the time to think about what happened when, what happens if these things
Mhm.
happen and what's our plan for it? How do we deal with it? Okay, we're not going to plan for it. Okay, cool. Great.
Mhm.
That's a choice that we make as a team. So how do we deal with that? I think that's just such a great exercise that I think a lot of CIOs have had great success with. So I love hearing those stories because it's such a game changer.
Well, and some businesses have experienced it real life. I mean, JERA did with Hurricane Beryl coming in through Houston, right?
Mm.
And interestingly enough, from an IT standpoint, we had provided as much business continuity as we could, right? We've got everything running in the cloud. everybody has a phone or a computer, and as long as they can access the cloud, they can work, so they can be anywhere they want. And so, we built that as best we could from an IT standpoint. The business side hadn't really thought about business continuity because they operated, we're in power generation, but they still operated under the assumption that, well, we've had hurricanes before, but we've always had a cell signal. Or, somebody's had electricity, so I could go and plug in or do
Yeah.
something. Hurricane Beryl rolled through and it took down the cells and the power.
Yep.
For a day and a half, JERA wasn't able to conduct a lot of business. And, that presented some challenges, which then led to, we really need to create a corporate business continuity plan. And fortunately, the IT side of that, outside of having computers available that are stored off site that can be activated, everything else was in place. But the rest of it, right? Who do we ship to San Antonio from Houston, right? To make sure they're safe, that type of thing. And it's the same thing, right? You have to experience that exercise. Sometimes tabletops will work. Sometimes it takes a real life event.
Yeah, no, well said. Well, you know what? I've got this burning question for you, and I know it's a little off topic, but it's kicking back to earlier. And when it comes to nuclear, I know I can't help but think that isn't that, and I'm not some expert on energy by any means. I'm about as layman as it can come. So I can't be alone in this thinking, other than there are people who are scared of it because of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and okay, so that's a PR problem. But the reality is we've grown a lot and changed a lot when it comes to nuclear since then. And is that not kind of the future for the cheap, free, or cheap, clean energy? And if it's not,
so I'm not speaking on behalf of the industry. I'm just speaking on behalf of myself personally,
yeah.
Right. And as on behalf of myself personally, I believe that some form of nuclear, right? And right now it's fusion, which ends up with the waste and everything. Will there be a day when we're not splitting them apart, but we're forcing them together and we have fission? I think there might be. I mean, we're starting to see some little breakthroughs. The biggest challenge they face is that they still, they will take these two particles that nobody could ever see even under the microscope, right? And slam them together. And the amount of energy that is created almost blows up the lab. I mean,
right. Yeah.
It's almost like, okay, are we going to have to do this in space, if you will, to keep everybody safe? But that's the biggest concern around nuclear is just if something goes wrong, what is it? Right. And what happened with Chernobyl, what happened with 3 Mile Island was, hey, something went wrong. Have we come a long ways since then? Absolutely. A lot of people don't think about it. And for those who follow energy have seen a lot of comments about the small nuclear reactors, right? Well, the U.S. Navy has been operating successfully small nuclear reactors now for 30 plus years. And the technology around them has come up huge. The biggest challenge we face in our U.S. in deploying them is that all of our regulations around nuclear are assuming an older technology. The regulations have not caught up to what the technology can actually do. So if I made the decision as a power generator in cooperation with ERCOT that we're going to go out here and we're going to put in a small nuclear power plant, it will not be online for 15 years, soonest, because of all the regulators that we have to go through at the local, state, federal level. Because in addition to FERC, we have the EPA. In addition to that, we have this, right? And so that's the biggest challenge for the nuclear. There are many people who are looking and pushing and making applications and doing that. You see things like taking older nuclear power plants that have been, retired and trying to bring them back to life. There was a big announcement when Amazon wanted to do, I think it was Amazon wanted to do that with 3 Mile Island and bring it back to life. So far, the regulators have said, no way. So we'll see if they get over that, but we'll see what happens with that. It's also interesting when you do that, which is the challenge we face with home solar, right? Is If you go back to the days of Tesla, right? Tesla's idea was that every place that would need a power generation would just have it. It would be small, it would be local for them, and they'd be responsible for their own power. That got changed out when we moved from DC to AC, and we suddenly created this large power plant that would supply power to a lot of people, right? And that just completely changed our entire economy, how we thought about power, how we moved to that. Now that we're moving into solar and wind and moving down to the local home level or the local business level, suddenly we're seeing people saying, well, why am I going to buy it from the grid if I can provide it myself? Well, you're seeing the same discussion on the bigger scale with these smaller nuclear power plants. And right now, the regulators don't have any way of managing regulation around something that isn't feeding a public grid. But they want to, and they feel like they have to. So that has to be worked out, particularly with the small nuclear reactors. So that's another challenge that they're having to face as we move forward with this.
So it's not really on the technical side of things. It is purely a regulatory issue that prevents that, kind of nuclear from being really ubiquitous and dropping the cost and the availability.
My belief is yes, because the cost of building one of those is not a whole lot different than building a new thermal plant of some type. Right. It is certainly more expensive than building out a wind farm, but not hugely more expensive.
Right. Yeah, no, I've heard I think that Bill Gates has got that that small nuclear thing. Are you familiar with this? Right. These small and they deploy them through Africa and stuff. They can do it everywhere but the US, really, where they can put in this small little plant, super cost effective.
And it's working, and it's cost effective, and it's working. Right now, on the flip side, the biggest thing that has to be wrapped around that is security and the skills to maintain it. And it's a specialized skill set, right? Yeah. So I'm hoping, I've seen Bill doing that. My hope is that Bill is also then training all the local people on the specialized skill set, training the local governments on the regulatory side and what works and how it should be set up and put into place so that they can continue into the future safely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We've seen what happened in Ukraine. Yeah. Right. When you have an opposing force coming in and attacking, right? And then some bad things could potentially happen.
Yep. No, 100%. Well, Bruce, this has been so much fun, and I think we could go on and on. Really appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing and educating. I mean, I think I learned a ton. I hope other people did too. But before we go, can you tell us, tell everybody where they can find out more about you and JERA?
Absolutely. Well, JERA you can find out at JERAamericas.com or JERA.com. Myself, I will be transitioning away from CIO here at JERA at the end of this year. They're bringing in a new guy that I'm training this week. And so you can find me on LinkedIn, Bruce Otte on LinkedIn. And so reach out and talk to me anytime if you just have any questions or anything like that.
All right. Thanks again for coming on, Bruce. And until next time.
Thanks, Matt. Take care now.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.